Tonight, Mark Haines begins a series of special reports on the stars of rock and roll of yesterday and where they are today. Mark?
And it is fascinating to find out where they are today. Some rock and roll stars of the 50s were just teenagers when they made it big. What success did for them and to them was sometimes good, sometimes bad.
I have a changed life. They call it born again. They call it born again. The Lord called it, you must be born again. And what happened is he changed my heart. He came in and changed me.
Changed is an understatement. In the 50s, he was a typical Italian kid from the Bronx. Well, maybe not typical. He and his friends hung out here on East 187th Street singing. And they named their group after the cross street.
Why must I be a teenager in love?
It was 1959. Eisenhower was president. Nikita Khrushchev was threatening to bury us. But as teenagers, we didn't care. Doo-wop rock was at its peak. Today, Dion will not sing the old songs. Today, his singing carries a different message. Now, Dion travels the country singing the gospel. The money's not too good, the adoring crowds are a lot smaller, but Dion says he's never done better.
I got 8 gold records, sold 23 million recordings, been around the world, married my childhood sweetheart. We just celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary. Have 3 beautiful daughters. And with all the achievements and with all the love in my life, there was something missing. God doesn't want to sell albums. He wants to change lives. But I never opened my life to God. I never said, Lord, you made me. What do you want? And when I did that, my life changed.
Why must I be a teenager in love?
Among the 3 original Belmonts was Fred Milano, and he too has changed. Today he manages a liquor store and owns a recording studio in Midtown Manhattan. He still wants to sing. He always wanted to sing.
We used to sing in high schools and sing on corners. Wherever we got together, we would sing. I mean, there was a certain amount of guys that sang. Like I sang with 3 or 4 different groups. Wherever you met the group, that's where you sang. And if they were in the hall, hey, come on over, we would sing. You know. So we were constantly singing. With
a new partner, Milano still sings under the name The Belmonts and is still looking for the road back to the top of the charts. At Jamaica High School, the kids of the mid-50s didn't sing on street corners. They sang in the school halls. They liked the echo effect that they got. And one of those kids was named Herbie Cox. He and his friends formed a group called the Cleftones, and they got a big break with a song Herbie had written on the subway.
yeah.
These days you can find Herb Cox and the Cleftones in Herb's basement in Queens, rehearsing for the occasional nostalgia show, bringing back the sound of the 50s.
Yeah.
But today, Herb Cox's first love is in an office in Lower Manhattan, where he is a computer analyst for Manufacturers Hanover Trust.
I love it. I'm very happy with it. I think this is a great organization to work for, and it happens to work in very well with, all of my outside interests as well.
The change from rocker to banker makes sense to Herb because he never thought music was the road to $1 million anyway.
When we first started out, the thing that was important to me is we did it because we liked it. It was fun. It was, wasn't money. That wasn't the motive. It was just fun.
The 50s revival has brought a lot of business to the Cleftones, but Herb says he'll stay in banking. And Dion says he will continue to say no to the nostalgia producers.
I was born again. Why should I go get dead again?
From rocker to banker, from singing for gold to singing for God. But you haven't seen anything yet. Tomorrow night we will take a look at where the trail led for some artists who only had 1 or 2 big hits. One wound up in Harlem, where she began. Another now makes a living in Africa. And tonight at 11, whatever happened to the girl groups? Bill?
Thank you, Mark. When we come back with Eyewitness...
The female groups.
Rock and roll is here to stay. It will never die. Pick me up from living and you look so fine. Baby, run, 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 baby, run, run.
Girl loves boy and her heart stands still. Teenage boy craziness. It's the essence of the girl groups. And those girls had a sound that started on the streets of New York. The schools and the streets were the breeding grounds for an awful lot of early rock and roll. For example, here at PS 109, back in the late 50s, there were a group of girls. They had a teacher named Harold Leeds. They took a little poetic license with his name and came up with a song that sounded like this.
1, 2, 3, look at Mr. Lee.
Mr. Lee by the Bobettes, one of the first girl groups, together with the Teen Queens, who sang
Eddie, my love.
and the Chantels with
Please go.
They created a form of female vocalizing that lasted for years and inspired a lot of others.
We were listening to Arlene Smith and Chantels, you know, that was one of my favorite groups. And we would be babysitting, and we would harmonize with the records. As we were listening to WWRL and Dr. Jive, and that was very popular.
Beverly Lee of the Shirelles, a girl group that had a dozen hits in 10 years. But Beverly still lives in her hometown of Passaic, New Jersey, in a modest garden apartment. Together with Doris Coley, they still sing as the Shirelles.
A lot of people thought we'd stop performing because they hadn't heard anything, but we were either in Australia, Japan, Europe, or playing the islands, or doing the Vegas, Tahoe, Reno circuit, and we would do clubs or one-nighters or colleges.
This is the Brill Building on Broadway. Back in the 60s, this building was full of songwriters who would do nothing but write hit after hit after hit, including one song that Beverly Lee and the Shirelles really didn't like very much.
Soldier boy.
When Soldier Boy was presented to us, we had 5 minutes left of the session, and they said, do the song, and we thought it was very corny. We didn't like it, and I'm so glad we did it.
By the early 60s, rock and roll had changed. Hit songs were no longer born on street corners, but made by creative writers and producers like Phil Spector. Spector's songs were sung by the Ronettes, the Crystals, the Chiffons. His wall of sound was rocking, sexy, sensual, and fun. Phil Spector put his stamp on another 60s rock act, the Righteous Brothers, singers of Blue-Eyed Soul. I'll talk to them tomorrow. Mark Haines, Channel 7 Eyewitness News. And by the way, on the...
to an end. Mark Haines is here now for part 2 of his special report on rock and roll. A look back at some of the stars that simply faded away.
Boy, some of them faded fast, too, Bill. Some of the first rock stars were just innocent kids, and they were happy just to sing. They got ripped off as a result of that. There was the occasional shrewd businessman, and tonight we're going to meet both. The closer you are. In 1957, America was changed forever by an event in Little Rock, Arkansas. President Eisenhower sent federal troops there to enforce school desegregation. In New York, baseball fans were changed forever by the sudden and dramatic closing of the Polo Grounds. And on the radio, we listen to Earl Lewis and the Channels. Today, Earl Lewis works for the government in a Bronx post office. His experience as a rock star was typical of the 50s.
After we did That's My Desire, it became a full-time job. And we did that for about 4 years, and then things started to fall apart, so I had to start working.
The Impalas were another here one day, gone the next group. Their one big hit... lead singer Joe Frazier.
We started right here in Canarsie, right on this corner, as a matter of fact. It was 24 years ago, and I, for one, have never moved. The monetary rewards are not as fast as people would like you to believe they are. It takes a lot of hard work, and anybody that's made $1 million out of music, believe me, they really deserve it.
In 1958, a pianist named Van Cliburn became the first American to ever win the Tchaikovsky Piano Contest in Moscow. But American teenagers were not listening to Rachmaninoff. They were listening to rock and roll and Lloyd Price. In 1959, Price scored again with a song called Personality.
'Cause you've got personality, walk with personality, talk with personality, smile with personality.
But then Lloyd Price just quit.
When I quit believing I could make hit records, I quit making records. I just didn't want to make records to make records. It was not the idea of that I could not make records. I quit believing it.
Here on Broadway is a club called Casablanca. Well, it used to be Birdland. Birdland went out of business, and in the mid-'60s, Lloyd Price bought it and turned it into a club called Lloyd Price's Turntable. Well, that didn't work out, and you'll never guess what Lloyd Price does now.
I'm in Nigeria. I'm in business in Nigeria. I'm in import and export business. And I go out and search for finance for companies in Nigeria.
Lloyd Price is not the only rock star who just quit the business entirely. Another one is right here today at the Chama Child Development Center in Harlem. In 1958, the Giants were on their way to a showdown with the Colts at Yankee Stadium, and Arlene Smith and the Chantels were having fun being rock and roll stars.
Getting into the business was not because we wanted to make $1 million. Even though I wanted to sing as a profession, the concept of money just did not enter my mind.
Today, Arlene Smith spends her days teaching 5- and 6-year-olds in Harlem, trying to give them a head start for when they enter the public schools. Does Arlene miss being a star? Well, yes and no. After all, to some people, she still is a star.
The children are a fine audience, and they kept my spirit up. I mean, when you walk into a classroom full of little people who have all kinds of things and talents and abilities, you kind of forget about the pains and the frustrations, and I find that this is true even now.
Pains and frustrations, that's a recurring theme this week as you watch these people. It wasn't all easy street. It really wasn't. A lot of them who should be on easy street aren't. Tomorrow night, you're going to meet a couple of those men. And tonight on Eyewitness News at 11 o'clock, we will report on the 60s sound, Blue-Eyed Soul, a group that everyone thought was black. And they were white. Bill?
Thank you, Mark. Tonight, Mark Haines is here to continue his special report. 6 o'clock rock, with the story of stars who made it to the top of the charts and never got wealthy doing it. Mark?
Surprising to me, and probably going to be surprising to you, that I figured a lot of these people were sitting around a pool somewhere these days, just soaking in the sun. You're talking about kids for the most part, though, back in the 50s. Young people who were happy just for the chance to perform. There were some who saw rock as their road to riches, but never got there.
My intentions were to become famous and sing for the people and show them what's in my heart.
They got the papers and the time. All you don't get no sense and cash. If you don't step back to the floor, you ain't gonna rock and roll no more. Say yakety-yak.
No talking.
Today, Carl Gardner still performs with the group he started, the Coasters, although he is the only original member left. And things haven't worked out the way Gardner expected. He wanted to sing big band music or jazz, but for whatever reason, the Coasters made it big with a succession of novelty tunes. Maybe because the late 50s were kind of dull and we all needed a dose of nonsense.
Who walks in the classroom, cool and slow? Who calls the English teacher daddy or Charlie Brown?
The people wanted that kind of stuff from us. And Leaving Soul would not let me go in there and do any pop. And none of us go in there and do any pop because that's what the people wanted from us.
Carl lives in a very clean, very comfortable, very modern apartment house. Nothing to be ashamed of, but back in the glory days, He figured someday he'd own buildings like that.
And not only did I want to sing, too, I wanted the money also. Don't get me wrong. You know, I still want my million.
This is the corner of 134th Street and what used to be 8th Avenue in Harlem. It was right here that a guy named Earl Carroll used to hang out and harmonize with his buddies back in the 50s. His big dream was to sing with the Coasters. Well, in 1960, he made it, but not before he had a group hit of his own.
Slidey up and call me Speedo, but my real name is Mister. Slidey up and call me Speedo, but my real name is call me Mo, some call me Joe.
Just remember Speedo, he don't ever take it slow. Well, now they boom, boom, doobie-doo.
Unlike Gardner, Earl Carroll was never tuned into money.
It wasn't about money anywhere in those days. We loved what we did, you know, and the guys got a chance to be in the lights and the people are hollering and the girls are winking, and so you take it all in stride.
Today, Earl Carroll works as a janitor in a public school in New York. A come down? Not the way Earl sees it. He's put a daughter through college, taken courses that have raised his reading ability from second grade level to high school level, and he still performs on weekends with the Coasters. The hardest thing to take, he says, was his own kids' taste in music.
They were Beatle fans. They just, Coasters, Beatles, that's what's happening. I say, but I'm your dad. Just listen, Beatles, Rolling Stones. I said, well, okay, what the hell.
There's a moon out tonight. Let's go strolling. There's a girl in my...
The Capris started in the 50s, but didn't hit it big until 1961. Today, the man behind that voice is a man behind a badge.
We went into a studio, and for $250, we did one take of There's a Moon Out Tonight, and the flip side was called Indian Girl, and we were out of there in 20 minutes. With $1 million seller.
Nick Santamaria spends his days processing people arrested in Queens. He wishes the doo-wop days were back, but not for nostalgic reasons.
It was so much fun. It was really so much fun. It was such a positive thing to be doing in those days. I'm sure today you're very well aware there's a lot of kids hanging around on corners with nothing to do. I really think that if someone revitalized the doo-wop craze in today's market, a lot of these kids would really get into it and be doing something positive with themselves.
You might think it'd be kind of a shock to go from the stage to working in a precinct house. But believe it or not, Nick says there are similarities.
Being a police officer, I think it's probably the closest thing to being an entertainer, because I enjoy meeting people, I enjoy talking with people and discussing what their likes and dislikes are.
And he doesn't miss the old days because he never expected them to last.
In my heart, I knew it was happening too fast. It was a lark. We had no manager at the time. Everything was just thrown at us. You know, it's been good to me. Rock and roll has been very exceptionally well to me. And like I'm saying, I'm glad to be here and still a part of it. But now they often call me Speedo, but my real name is Mr. Earl.
Earl Carroll, one of the nicest human beings you will ever meet. Tonight at 11 o'clock, I'll continue reporting on the 60s sounds with those who brought us the Bristol Stomp. Which Bristol, by the way, is it about? Is it Bristol, England, Bristol, Connecticut? Actually, it's Bristol, Pennsylvania. I'll give you that much. And tomorrow at 6, we will continue with the 50s and some people who are more in demand today than ever before. Gentlemen?
Thank you, Mark. When we come back...
The Apollo Theater in Harlem is where an awful lot of black rock groups got their big break. They got out in front of the public. But perhaps one of the strangest breaks of all came here at the Apollo to a group called the Five Crowns. They were appearing here one night with the Drifters. The manager of the Drifters was fed up with them, and he made them an offer they couldn't refuse.
He came up to our manager, Lover Patterson, which managed the Five Crowns, and asked us would he like to turn us over to be the Drifters. And so we all discussed it, and we decided that we would love to become Drifters.
The Drifters. As a rock group, the name goes back 30 years to the legendary Clyde McPhatter. Both the original Drifters and the group formed by Charlie Thomas belong to the very beginnings of rock and roll.
On a corner, street lights, at 12 or 1 o'clock midnight, You know, you'll find you 4 guys, black or white or Italian or whatever. They would be on the corner, and they would be drinking a little small light wine and getting to know each other, and they would be singing.
You're adorable, a dream girl to me. You're all...
Doo-wop rock was a sort of urban folk music. But by the beginning of the 1960s, a new sophistication came in, and the drifters learned to change.
There goes my baby, moving on down the line.
There Goes My Baby was the first rock record to use strings.
She is bound, my broken heart.
Atlantic was looking for drifters to record rhythm and blues with violin strings, you know, like with the classic outlook, you know, and we had to put rhythm and blues with class.
Charlie Thomas and the Drifters still perform, still cut records. A testament, I suppose, to their ability to change with the times.
They say the neon lights are bright on Broadway. On Broadway. The kids in Bristol are sharp and physical when they do the Bristol stop. Really something when they join is jumping when they do the Bristol stop.
Another group that had to learn to roll with every change in rock fashion, the Dovells. They also began as teen doo-woppers.
I went to school, and the bottom line is you either sang or played basketball or you got hurt.
Originally 5, there are now just 2 Dovells left. Jerry Gross and Mark Stevens. They were victims of the British invasion of 1964.
We went to Japan in '64. We spent 4 months over there, strictly working nightclubs with big bands and everything else. We came back, the country was totally changed. The Beatles were here. We came back, we went, what's a Beatle? And we couldn't get a record played. Disc jockeys would not play an American artist.
So the Dovells turned into a musical comedy act and hit the nightclub circuit. Today, they're trying to get their own TV show produced.
Every prayer.
Tomorrow night, Motown and what's happening with some of its stars. Mark Haines, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
Well, if you rock in Russia, you're
History of rock and roll. Mark?
Bill, of course, music is a business. Like any business, some people are shrewd and successful. Some are victimized, and some just can't take the pressure. But those rock stars who started as kids, most learned their economics at the School of Hard Knocks. One thing almost all the rock and rollers of the 50s have in common is money. Very few of them ever made any. Arlene Smith of the Chantels.
It's annoying that to realize that I should be a very wealthy woman right now. I mean, maybe it's still being played, still being sold.
Carl Gardner of the Coasters still makes a good living doing nostalgia concerts and still tries to come up with that current hit that will make him a #1 performer all over again. But he, too, was a victim of unscrupulous record company executives.
They got the papers and the time. All you don't get no second chance.
Nobody back in those days, including all groups, got their money. You understand? We didn't get the monies that was due us. A lot of us was ripped off in the 50s. So I should be in the south of France right now.
There's a moon out tonight.
Nick Santamaria wrote There's a Moon Out Tonight back in the late 50s. Today he's a cop. Not only did he not get any money for the song, he isn't even on record as the man who wrote it.
Some very enterprising men found a way of getting it away from me. And I have not listed as the writer on any of the songs. Needless to say, it was the only real big hit we ever had. I never saw any royalty money from it.
Santamaria is not bitter about it. He chalks it up to experience.
He often call me Speedo, but my real name is Nathan.
And Earl Carroll of the Cadillacs is equally philosophical. Today he's a school custodian. Every time his hit record Speedo is played, he should get a royalty. He doesn't. But he doesn't feel cheated either.
God's been good. A whole lot of guys didn't even get up this morning, so I think we're ahead of the game.
Earl Carroll is right. A lot of his fellow rock and roll stars did not get up this morning and never will. They're dead. And we're not just talking about the big names like Presley and Mama Cass. We're talking about people who died relatively unnoticed.
Tonight, tonight.
Bob Scholl of the Mellow Kings. That's his voice singing lead in 1957. He died in a boating accident in 1975.
Good night, my love. Pleasant dreams.
Jesse Belvin in 1956 recorded Good Night, My Love. He died just 4 years later in a car crash. Jape Richardson, who recorded under the name Big Bopper. He died in 1959 in the same plane crash that claimed the lives of Buddy Holly and Richie Valens. Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers. In 1968, Lyman died of a drug overdose. Joe Negroni died in 1978 of an aneurysm. In 77, Sherman Garnes died during open heart surgery.
I wonder, who wrote the book out loud?
John Ryans, bass singer with the Monotones, died in 1972 at the age of 32. Bobby Lester of the Moonglows. He died of cancer in 1980.
She's the woman that I know. She's the woman that...
Gene Vincent. He fell victim to acute depression in the 60s and died of bleeding ulcers in 1972. Danny Rapp of Danny and the Juniors. 3 months ago, he was found dead in a motel room in Arizona. He had killed himself. Aside from At the Hop, the group had only one other hit.
Rock and roll is here to stay. It will never die. It was meant to be that way, so I don't know why. I don't care what people say. Rock and roll is here to stay.
What really stands out in my mind after putting this series together, meeting these people, is that if you picked 100 former rock singers at random, you would have a group of people just like any other group of 100 people picked at random. When the lights go down and the music has stopped, they're just like you and me. Bill?